Let me tell you about four people. Robert is 68, Karen is 52, Marcus is 38, and Zoe is 24. Four different people spanning four different decades, all of whom look like they have everything figured out by their era's standards. These four live in completely different economic realities, yet despite that, every single one of them fell into the exact same financial trap. And to be clear, this has nothing to do with being bad with money. Most of the people who fall into this trap are actually pretty careful. They check their accounts, they think before they spend. The trap is much sneakier than mere carelessness. At some point in every generation's timeline, the surrounding culture dictates what doing well is supposed to look like. You absorb these unwritten rules, and the moment you can finally afford to live that specific version of success, you spend to match it. It is incredibly difficult to spot from the inside. When everyone around you is following the exact same script, checking off those cultural boxes doesn't feel like a vulnerability. It feels like responsible progress. Robert grew up watching his parents rent. In the post-war era, buying a home was the ultimate cultural signal of stability. So when Robert got his first decent job, he took out the biggest mortgage the bank would approve. That was the natural move. This chart tracks Robert's wealth today. Over 40 years, that property appreciated wildly. His house is now worth 4 times what he paid for it. On a spreadsheet, Robert appears incredibly wealthy, but almost all of his net worth is locked inside the 4 walls he lives in. Selling means leaving his neighborhood of 4 decades, and the liquid savings he does have won't comfortably fund 25 years of retirement. Karen came of age during the rise of the dual-income household. The prevailing wisdom for Gen X was to climb the corporate ladder, out-earn their parents, and buy a more comfortable life. This graph tracks Karen's strategy. She did earn more, but every time that top income line stepped up, her expenses expanded to match it. A promotion at 32 meant an upgraded car. Hitting 6 figures at 38 meant a bigger house and overseas holidays. Because her spending grew at the exact same pace as her salary, her actual savings rate barely moved. At 52, she makes a fantastic income, but she is 10 years from retirement and the math is incredibly tight. For both of these generations, success meant acquiring tangible items and upgrading lifestyle standards. They successfully checked off the cultural boxes, but heavily underfunded the financial foundation underneath them. Millennials faced a different economic landscape. The 2008 financial crisis wiped out the early earning years of an entire cohort, making traditional signals like homeownership mathematically out of reach for many. When you can't afford the old markers of success, you spend on what you can afford. Culture backed this pivot, branding the accumulation of experiences, travel, and convenience as an enlightened approach to money. Marcus spent his late 20s and early 30s racking up memories. At 38, he has a passport full of stamps, but very little invested, no real property, and a quiet anxiety about his future. Then there's Zoe. Gen Z is the most financially literate generation in history. They understand compound interest and index funds as teenagers. You would assume they'd bypass the trap entirely. Zoe proudly invests £50 a month into a brokerage account, but she simultaneously spends £200 a month maintaining the digital aesthetic required to look like an investor online. The costume changes. It might be a suburban house, a filled passport, or a perfectly curated tech setup. But the function is always identically the same, prioritizing the look of arrival over the quiet reality of building it. Every generation has people who step around this. When you look at their habits, they all share one specific behavior. They separated the outward signal of wealth from the actual substance of it. They decided to look less wealthy in the short term. They kept the older car, delayed the aesthetic upgrades, and poured the difference into things that compound. For Robert, that meant funding his pension just as aggressively as he maintained his house. For Karen, it meant picking one single lifestyle upgrade per raise and banking the rest. For Marcus, it meant taking one big trip a year instead of 4 and automating investments. And for Zoe, it means focusing on growing her actual portfolio faster than she builds the look of it online. The math always points to the same sequence. Fund the assets first and the lifestyle second, until those assets are generating enough to genuinely pay for the lifestyle. All 4 of these people just did what their era told them to do. Take a hard look at where your money goes every month. Which generation's trap is currently holding your net?
Looking wealthy and actually being wealthy are often opposites. Robert spends his evenings in a house full of memories, but with a bank account that can no longer support the property. Karen earns a top-tier salary that places her among the highest earners in the country. Marcus is always the one planning high-end trips with his friends. Zoe is built for the algorithm, gaining viral fame for her aesthetic and seemingly flawless lifestyle. To an outside observer, all four have made it. They project the exact image of financial success that society expects. But there is a quiet moment that eventually catches up to anyone playing this game. It's the solitary night you look at the math and realize the numbers don't add up. Robert realized his home equity is useless if he's cash poor. Staying in the house means staying stuck, but selling it feels like losing his entire identity. Karen checked her retirement numbers for the first time in years. Even after 2 decades of a high income, she realized she had no actual freedom. Marcus saw that 10 years of work had resulted in 0 solid assets. Meanwhile, Zoe opened her portfolio and saw that her viral posts were hiding a tiny, fragile balance. This chart explains the wall they all hit. While their lifestyle assets rose, their liquid wealth stayed near 0. They were performing wealth instead of creating it. This is a common trap. When income is burned on ego and distraction, it becomes a weight that drags down long-term security. This fork in the road is where 9 out of 10 people lose their way. Most of that group will either ignore the math entirely or try to escape the anxiety by spending even more money, looping back into the same debt cycle. The small group that actually wins does so by accepting reality and acting immediately. Escaping this trap isn't about finding a higher salary. It's about winning the psychological battle at this specific fork in the road. Robert swallowed his pride and rented out his extra space. He cut his overhead to turn his home back into an income stream. Karen audited every single expense. She took control by slashing 30% of her lifestyle costs to force a higher savings rate. Marcus traded his constant weekend trips for a strict automated investing system that removed all emotion from his finances. Zoe stopped spending to maintain an image. She redirected those funds and multiplied her actual investments by 4. These shifts required no complex engineering. Each person simply traded social status for systemic control. From the outside, these changes look boring. On the inside, they build a sustainable financial foundation. All 4 of these people are less flashy today than they were a year ago, but for the very first time, they are genuinely wealthy. Becoming wealthy starts when you stop pretending you already are, because time is the one thing that isn't on your side. It is running against you every single day. You have a choice: stay comfortable in the illusion or make the uncomfortable decisions that actually move you forward. If you are ready to get out of the trap, say the word. I'll give you a precise action plan based on your situation to help you start today.